Welcome to another episode of Vaseline with Stu. Today we're going to do something a little different. We're going to go over the comprehensive route example. Yes, the route example that is in your rulebook, pages 828 to 829. Why am I doing this? Because that section is far too big to read and cover in a little diagram they have there. So what I've done for you is duplicated the diagram in the deluxe maps and place the units thereon, and we shall go through the routing phase of the Russian player and the routing phase of the German player after the Russians have routed. So this is the routing phase of the Russian player turn, which leads to some limitations that you will see in the rules. If you have any questions about the sections, pause, look over the sections as you would normally during the rules and as you would normally during your reading and review of this section. Look at the rule section when it talks about specific rules, and then you can highlight or review what those rules entail. Some of the times you won't need to do it, but other times you may. So take the time to pause, go back, check it out, just like you would normally do it. But I'm just doing this to make it a little bit easier to read that through that whole section that's kind of small print for you guys. And some of it's been edited. Hopefully I've got the updated version here, but let's go through it. If it's not updated, then you let me know what's been done wrong on it, all right? And that way everyone else will know what the correct option is at the particular instance. So here we go. Let's talk about the Russian routes. The Russian routes first, because during the Russian player's turn, the attacker must route first versus the defender. So normally, if you're attacking someone, you have to run away first. But if you're defending, you can afford to break if you break the attacker, because he'll have to route, say like in a final protective fire attack, he'll have to run back first, and you can stay there and rally if that's indeed the case that you can do. So let's just go over the example. Russian routes. The pinned half squad in hex P8 voluntarily breaks, and that's rule section 10.41. Specifically, units within both the LOS and normal range per 10.532 of an armed, unbroken, known enemy ground and or adjacent to an unbroken enemy ground unit may voluntarily break even if pinned at the start of the route phase, so as to able to route during that route phase, but only if breaking will not cause their immediate reduction or elimination. So if this unit were to voluntarily break and then later realize that, oh wait, he's just going to be surrendering or eliminated, then he can't voluntarily break. And the unit adjacent to him, and this one of course is the tank and the single man counter. Before the routes of the non-disrupted units, the disrupted squad in Q2 must surrender to the 467 in R1 despite having a legal route path to P2. The surrender is accepted, and Q2 is replaced by a squad-sized unarmed multi-man counter, which is possessed by the 467 in R1. If this surrender were rejected, the disrupted squad would be eliminated and no quarter would be invoked for the German side only. So the surrendering unit, the broken 447 on level 2 of M2 does not need to route, but if it elects to, it could route to any location in its building, or it could ignore the building entirely since it started the phase in that building. And it could route to M1. Routing to L1 or L0 is illegal because that would entail moving closer to the known enemy unit in J1. If it routed to the ground level of N1, it could stay there. And because of the adjacent broken known enemy unit O1, it could not continue to the N2, M1, or M2 because that would be moving closer to the known enemy unit it remembers seeing in J6, K3, and J1, and so would surrender or be eliminated for failure to route if new quarter had been in effect. It therefore routes downstairs to the ground level of M2, dropping the HMG in M2 level 2 because its inherent portage capacity of 3 is not enough to carry the 5 portage point weapon, the HMG. It's huge. Either single man counter in the location where the HMG was dropped can immediately attempt to recover it. And that's 4.44. So you have to roll a die roll to recover it. You don't just recover and you automatically get it. You still need to make a recovery die roll. It just allows a recovery attempt. The hero does so with a die roll of 5. So the hero can do it or the leader can recover it. The 9-1 leader could rout with the squad, but elects to stay with the hero and help man the HMG. So therefore, 2 single-man counters can man a support weapon with full effect, full firepower. The broken 447 in J4 does not need to rout, but chooses to rout to K5 and L4 for 4MF. Routing to K5 does not bring it closer to either of the known enemy units in J6 or K3, and K6 was not known to J4 at the time it entered K5. It cannot stay there because of the adjacent unbroken known enemy unit in K6, but it cannot be interdicted there because the 467 is counter-exhausted, and K5 has a +1 height advantage terrain effect modifier relative to the K3 unit. Even if the German unit in J6 was not pinned, it could not interdict by itself because it has no support weapon, let alone one capable of being fired at full effect by a lone single-man counter. So that's a big distinction. If he had a light machine gun and he wasn't pinned, he still could not interdict because he cannot fire at full effect. Whereas in the previous example where the 9-1 leader and the hero man the HMG, now that HMG could be fired at full effect and therefore can interdict any unit within its normal range. The 7-0 elects to accompany the broken squad throughout its route using voluntarily rout, which is 10.711. So a non-berserk, non-pinned leader already stacked with a broken unit before it routs may elect to rout with a broken unit even though he is not broken. So you have some other stipulations there, but you have to be non-berserk, non-pinned. Pinned leaders may not rout with broken units. So the routing units do not have to stay in L4 since that hex is no farther from the known enemy unit in K3 as their original hex. But their only route options at this point are to move upstairs to level 1 or continue routing to M5, which hex cannot be ignored as a route destination. They elect to move upstairs to L4 level 1 for their 5th movement factor and end their route there. The broken squad in L8 must rout since it is in the same hex as an unbroken known enemy unit and not in melee. It may be in close combat, but melee and close combat are not the same thing, so don't get those confused. A lot of people ask, how can he rout out of the hex? I don't understand what's going on here. Yes, you may leave an enemy unit's hex location when routing, as long as you're not in melee. So you may leave if you are in an enemy-occupied location. It must route towards building M7, since that building will bring it farther away from all known enemy units in J9, L8, and M9. The first hex it enters while routing cannot be L9 or M8, since that would be moving adjacent to the unbroken known enemy unit in M9. It cannot enter K9 from L8, since that would be moving closer to the known enemy unit in J9. Therefore, the first hex it routes through must be K8 or L7. It cannot low crawl when leaving an enemy-occupied location because it's only going to move 1 hex and you'll still be adjacent to an enemy at the end of the route. And the squad in M8 is 9 as the AFV MG in L8 can interdict the route to either K8 or L7 because the +1 height advantage terrain effect modifier does not apply when the LOS crosses the crest hex line traversed by the moving unit. And that's section B10.31. Read up on those hill sections. Hills can be kind of tricky. Most of the time they're simplified, but they can be kind of tricky when applying the open ground modifier. Therefore, The broken unit cannot route without being subject to interdiction, and since no quarter is not in effect, it surrenders, and the squad in M9 accepts the surrender. The broken 447 in M5 cannot route because it is not DM. Simple. The broken 447 in N3 becomes DM since it started the route phase in open ground, LOS, and normal range of the known enemy unit in O1 and must route. However, it cannot route toward any of the known enemy units in O1, K3, or P5, so it is eliminated for failure to route. Notice no quarter is not in effect, so this is the example of elimination by failure to route. Everyone gets that confused. Even I get that confused of, hey, do I get the failure to route? Oh, I don't understand. No quarter's not in effect. Why doesn't he just whatever? So, but that is an example of failure to route without the no quarter being in effect. The broken squad in building 05 does not have to route since it is not adjacent, capital adjacent, to an unbroken known enemy unit. It cannot legally route toward any of the known enemy units it sees in R1, K3, J6, or P5, and so it stays right there in 05. The broken squad in R6 must route because of the adjacent unbroken known enemy unit in S6. Since it is encircled, it must surrender to the 467 in S6, despite having legal route paths upstairs to R6 level 1 or to Q6. Its surrender is accepted because it's encircled. That puts some other restrictions and stipulations on the unit. Encirclement for causing units to surrender is very key, taking positions much more easily instead of them breaking, routing, and coming back and fighting. So if you encircle them, they will surrender. It's kind of like they're disrupted, but not really. So look up encircled rules and get up to speed on those because they're very important. The half squad in P8, which voluntarily broke at the start of the route phase, must route since it is adjacent to the unbroken known enemy units in Q8. It must choose N8 as its destination and routes there via O9, but it cannot stay in N8 because of the known enemy unit in M9. It has enough MF remaining to reach M7, so it must attempt to do so since it is not low crawling. It routes to M7 via N7 since entering M8 would be moving adjacent to M9. The broken unit cannot drop the Russian LMG since it is less than or equal to the half squad's inherent portage capacity. The broken squad in S3 must route because of the adjacent unbroken known enemy unit in S2. It can ignore S3 level 1 as a route destination because it can ignore locations of the building it starts in. Row house hexes are considered separate buildings for route purposes. So in that case, it could route to, it may be forced to route to another row house location. It can also ignore R3 and P2 as being equidistant from the known enemy unit in R1. Able to ignore all route destinations within 6 MF, the broken unit is free to route anywhere it can legally reach on the board. It elects to route to R3, expending 3 movement factors via row house bypass at the S3, R3, S4 vertex. It cannot be interdicted at that vertex because the S4 grain field hindrance negates the open ground relative to the German unit in S5. From R3, it could spend 2 movement factors to enter the shell holes in Q3 and avoid interdiction from R1, or it can enter Q3 for 1 MF, risking interdiction without the shell hole terrain effect modifier, but able to reach P2 with its last 2 movement factors should it survive the interdiction morale check unpinned. It enters the shell holes for 2 MF and ends its route phase there. The enemy units in J6 are not known to the broken unit in either S3 or R3. Otherwise, it could not route to Q3. Even if grain fields did not exist and the 467 was in good order by itself in S2, the squads could still route to R3 via the S3, R3, S4 vertex without fear of surrender because it has the option of routing to the first level of S3. Because it has a different destination, it can go up or it can be interdicted directly immediately. That does not cause surrender. The broken squad in R2 foxhole must route since it is adjacent to the unbroken known enemy units in R1 and S2. Its route options are restricted by not moving closer to the known enemy units in J6 and not moving adjacent to the known enemy unit in S2. Its only route option is to enter R3 for 3 movement factors. 1 MF to exit the foxhole plus 2 MF to enter R3, and you can combine those in the route phase only, not in the movement phase. Only in the route phase may you combine that expenditure. It can move upstairs to level 1, but declines. It cannot be interdicted as it exits the foxhole because, like I said, unlike the movement phase advance phase, it combines that MF expenditure with the cost of entering N3, which is not open ground. That's B27.41 if you want to check that out. It could conceivably ignore R3 as a route destination because that hex is equidistant from the known enemy units in J6. But once it enters R3, it gains LOS to the known enemy units in S5 and cannot continue its route towards R5. It also cannot continue its route into Q4, because that would entail moving closer to the enemy units it remembers seeing in J6, even though J6 is not currently in its LOS. The broken squad in S2 must route because of the unbroken known enemy units in its own location. Its only option is to enter S3 and move upstairs to level 1 since it cannot remain adjacent to the unbroken and known enemy unit in S2, whose CC counter is removed once the broken unit leaves its location. It cannot use row house bypass to enter R3 because that would entail moving closer to the known enemy units it remembers seeing in J6. The broken squad in R8 cannot route because broken units cannot route out of melee. It must attempt to withdraw from melee in the upcoming close combat phase. See 11.16. And when you withdraw from close combat, you're going to get a -2 for withdrawal and -2 for broken. So good luck with that. If no quarter were in effect for the Germans, the broken squad in R6 would not surrender and would route to either Q6 or upstairs to R6 level 1. The broken squad in L8 would route to L7 and suffer interdiction there, and any survivors would be unable to route further without moving closer to the known enemy units in K6 and Q8. Unable to route away from the adjacent unbroken known enemy unit in L8, the broken unit would be eliminated for failure to route. The disrupted squad in Q2 could route to P1, where it would be then eliminated for failure to route, or to P2, and then stop upon seeing the known enemy units in J6. The other Russian routes would be unaffected. So that's strictly no quarter in that last example. Now let's go over the German routes. Since the Russians have routed, let's do the German routes. No German unit elects to use voluntarily break. The broken squad in J1 must route because of the adjacent unbroken known enemy unit in K1, but cannot route to J2 because that will be moving closer to the known enemy units, which routed to the upper level in L4. It therefore surrenders to K1, dropping the LMG in J1 before doing so. So you drop all your support weapons before surrendering. The guarding squad may immediately deploy despite being Russian. And another example of that is when you drop your LMG, when you surrender like that, if you had a leader in your location, he could then perform a free recovery die roll when you drop your LMG as you are surrendering that unit. The broken passenger in K3 does not need to route even if the vehicle were adjacent to a known enemy unit. I'll say that again. The broken passenger, has to be a passenger, in K3 does not need to route even if its vehicle were adjacent, capital adjacent, which means it's accessible, to a known enemy unit. If it were to rout, it would be placed underneath the vehicle and end the rout phase there. You're just mounting. You're spending all your movement factors jumping out. That's it. You drop out and you're done. And that section is D5.311. The broken units in J6 must rout because they are in open ground, LOS, and normal range of the two single-man counters manning the HMG in M2 Level 2. Remember what we said about that before? It's a fully functional machine gun, fully functional support weapon with two of them are manned. If the HMG were manned by just one single-man counter, it would still force this rout, but not able to interdict. Okay, interdiction's the key. It's still armed, but it's not able to interdict. The unbroken leader may not rout with the broken units because he is pinned, like we said before, 10.711. He would have to use voluntary break in order to do so. The routing unit's only valid route destinations are L9 and M9. They choose M9. They could low crawl to J7 on their way to M9 and end their routes there without being interdicted by the Russian HMG, or they could attempt to reach M9 by risking interdiction to J7, in J7 rather. They must route one at a time. The first broken squad decides not to low crawl and is pinned in J7, where it rolls a 7 on its interdiction morale check and ends its route there. The second squad also risks interdiction in J7, rolls an 11 on the interdiction morale check, and is casualty reduced. Unit substitution, remember, caused by failing ELR does not apply to broken units. If you're broken, you will not ELR fail. And that's 19.11. Check that out. It's an easily forgotten rule. This half squad continues its route to K8, L8, and there's no interdiction from the squad in M7 because the +1 AFV terrain effect modifier negates open ground. And finally to M9. The broken half squad low crawls to J7 and ends its route phase there without interdiction. The broken squad in P5 is not required to rout since it is not adjacent to an unbroken known enemy unit. If it routes, it must choose Q5 or P6 as its destination since those hexes only cost 2 movement factors as opposed to 3 movement factors for Q6. So you got to go the nearest in MF. Once in Q5, it could continue on to Q6 or Q7 if so desired. Or from P6, it could go to Q6. It could even attempt to enter R5 and strip the concealment of the Russian unit there. That's 12.15, Section A. But would then end its route in the last hex occupied before R5, where it would be eliminated for ending the route phase adjacent to an unbroken known enemy unit. It therefore routes to P6 and stops. If there were a good order known enemy unit in P6, the squad would surrender to it. The broken squad in S5, despite being desperation morale or DM'd, is not required to route since it is not adjacent to an unbroken known enemy unit. If it wanted to route, it could not route closer to the known enemy units it sees in R3 and R8. If the 447 and R5 were to voluntarily drop its concealment or have it stripped by the squad routing from P5, the squad in S5 would then have no route options and would be forced to surrender to the 447 in R5. If no quarter were in effect for the Russians, the squad in J1 and the one in S5 were the 447 and R5 to lose concealment would be eliminated for failure to route, and the other German routes would be unaffected. That ends the example that's in the book. I added a little bit to it. Even though most of these LOSs aren't to one another, and there's 1,000 units on this map, it's still the same basic principles that you can apply to longer ranges. Remember, it goes out to normal range for interdiction purposes. in terms of remaining in open ground. So take these principles and stretch them out for further ranges and LOS checks. And closer to a known enemy unit is still closer to a known enemy unit, regardless of whether it's 4 hexes, 3 hexes, or 30 hexes. It's still closer. So keep that in mind, and hopefully your routes will improve, and your ability to route when moving into position, if you happen to break, should improve and not lose more units for failure to route, because that's just a free kill, and we don't want to give anything the opponent gets for free. Just not a good thoughts. Thanks for watching, and we'll catch you next time with Vaseline with Stu.